Hello and welcome everyone to PS Canvas. 2024 is coming to an end, and I just wanted to take a look back at all the video games that I've played this year. For those of you that don't know, I am obsessively tracking my backlog in a sheet like so. 2023 was absolutely massive for gaming, but because 2024 was relatively light, it allowed me to sort of catch up on some of the games that I hadn't really completed and I'd been putting off for so long. There were some games this year which I played which I didn't really like all that much, but there were some others which were absolute bangers. These may not all have been released in 2024. These are just games that I played in 2024 and really enjoyed. And I didn't play Indiana Jones and The Great Circle just yet. So I wanted this to be a top 10, but there are more like 17 or so games in here, and I really enjoyed all of them, so I wanted to talk about all of them. So this is mostly gonna be a long form retrospective of games that I played in 2024, starting off with Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. This was gifted to me by my friend all the way back sometime in 2010, and I never really got around to playing it. Typically, what I've realized is that the older a game is, the less likely I am to like it because of the absence of a bunch of quality of life features. And, of course, poor visuals as well. Now, Chaos Theory is one of those rare exceptions. It's a true stealth game, the likes of which are incredibly rare today. There was this mission, I remember, where I had to break into a bank by rappelling down from the ceiling through lasers and such. That was super cool, and overall, this was a game that made me want to play stealthy. And it gave me a lot of tools to do it in that way, and I really felt like a spy. The age of the game did not hold it back. Like there were definitely some aspects of the game which felt dated. The graphics and some of the characters' faces, they would give me nightmares, but it did not hold it back enough from at least getting some sort of a mention on this list explicitly. I really liked it, and it was clearly a pioneer for its time, and I wish there were more games like it. So coming to, I guess this is number 17, Firewatch. So this was a short and sweet self-contained game which I really enjoyed. It was a bite-sized, 4 or 5 hour package. I completed it within a day. So the plot about how, it's just about observing fires and calling them out as they happen in a forest. But while that is sort of the setting, the focus of the game itself is about how being alone and isolated makes you kind of go mad and psychotic in some sense, or at least neurotic. Certain aspects of the game were really well done. Like Delilah and I bonded through a radio without even seeing each other, and I got attached to Delilah, and she was just a voice on the radio, and it was clear that she'd gotten attached to me as well. It managed to capture how neurotic humans can get when push comes to shove, and we are left in the wild to survive. And there was some really good dialogue and voice acting as well, and the visuals it had a unique art style, so it didn't look particularly dated as well. So, small, bite-sized, nice adventure, Firewatch. On to the 16th game in my list, Alan Wake 2. One of the trippiest and most artistic yet realistic games I have ever played. So this was one of those rare games that really melted my RTX 4080 with path tracing. The section with the musical was so trippy and really, really well done. And that was one of the sections where the game really was a looker. So the game is fun enough for its runtime, but as far as the gameplay itself goes, you're a guy with a gun shooting at things, and it wasn't particularly revolutionary, exactly. Again, the story as well, pretty well done, but not incredible. The reason this makes the list primarily is because of how trippy it is and how it managed to combine its live action and gameplay elements, and it made everything feel real and unreal at the same time. And it was that aspect of the experience, the trippiness and the sort of unreal feeling that you have, that slight sense of, okay, what the fuck is going on? It's that feeling that makes Alan Wake 2 really special. Maybe if the gameplay was a bit more novel or engaging, or the story as well, I suppose it would have made the top 10, but as it stands, it is still a very good game and worth playing through. On to number 15, Stellar Blade. So this I played relatively recently. It's been maybe a couple of weeks or so, and it was really fun to play through. The combat was really engaging, and Eve was, well, I suppose you can see for yourself. But beyond Eve herself, the game does have a really engaging gameplay loop and a combat system. I played it with outfits from Nier Automata, and I was not disappointed at all. In fact, I found Nier Automata relatively underwhelming. I played it this year as well. I feel like I should have stopped it after Route A. I did Route B, C, D, and E, and I don't know, it just did not click all that well for me. So, because a lot of people hype up Nier for the story, and the gameplay of Nier was very underwhelming because it was just way too mashy. Stellar Blade's gameplay was far better. The story was a bit but the graphics, the performance, and the gameplay were really done. And Eve was a looker. I have no shame in saying that. So, coming to number 14 on our list, Resident Evil 4 Remake. So this was one of my favorite third-person action shooters. I personally didn't really like Resident Evil 2 all that much. The remake, I mean. I haven't really played the originals. So much so, I didn't like 2 all that much, so much so that I never even tried Resident Evil 3. But this ended up, Resident Evil 4 ended up on multiple Game of the Year nominations, and I thought to myself, why the hell not? And when I played it, I really could see why. I can see how a lot of the games of this generation and to this day borrow from the standard that was set all the way back in 2005, and how Resident Evil 4 was a pioneer for the industry. The shooting and the action gameplay was really fun, and the game ran pretty well on my card. Granted, my card is pretty good, and my system is pretty powerful, but there are still games which bring it to its knees. This wasn't one of them. I ran it at 4K native with FPS values close to 80 or 90 most of the time. They should have included DLSS. They didn't. But I was personally, it didn't bother me too much. So I think it was just a fun game overall, Resident Evil 4. And of course, the campy dialogue added to Leon's charm as well, when he says to Salazar, "You talk too much," or when he says, "I guess this is their idea of a warm welcome." It was well done. And there was the way he sort of pointlessly backflips when the chainsaws are coming, when he could have just stepped back. All of that, I think they captured the feeling of the original pretty well. At least that's what I've seen online, but it isn't the original. That's another common take that I see. But I haven't played the original. As for the remake, I really liked it, and it deserves its spot here. I recently played the DLC as well, though that did not quite live up to this game, but it was still good enough time. And I guess at number 13, we have A Plague Tale Requiem. So this was one of the first games that I played this year, and it's a really dark and depressing tale of Amicia and Hugo. So I was spoiled a bit for the ending, but when I had to kill Hugo, I couldn't bring myself to, even though I knew I had to. So I just ended up waiting it out, and the other guy, I guess Laurentius' helper, I forgot his name, the other little guy, he was the one who had to kill Hugo. And it was a gut-wrenching experience from start to finish. And to quote Deadpool, a series of train wrecks with short commercial breaks of happiness. It's powerful and emotional. Even speaking about it makes me sad to see how Hugo, I'm thinking about how Hugo at the end sort of, is at the center of that nest. And it's just a depressing visual to see this cute little boy that I'd gotten attached to get killed like that. Most of the games that I played, I suppose barring one exception, which we shall see, did not hit the emotional highs and lows of this game. And there was no happy, cathartic moment here. It was just depressing all the way through. Not Last of Us Part 2 levels depressing, but this was still pretty sad. The gameplay itself was fun too, and the visuals were incredible. Again, this was one of those games which did push my GPU quite a lot. The game used the higher fidelity that was available to it to make you way more uncomfortable. I believe, if I remember right, Plague Tale Innocence already did a good job of making you feel uncomfortable stepping through bodies with all the rats. It did a really good job of grossing you out. This had more power behind it, and it just absolutely nailed it. Nailed the what do you call it? It absolutely nailed the set pieces in particular with all the rats and everything. It used way more rats and it could simulate a lot more. So I really liked it. Just it could have ranked higher, but it was just too depressing and it was painful game. So that's why it's over here. Coming in at number 12, we have Silent Hill 2. This game is often regarded as a classic, and given that I never really had a PS2, I had not really tried it. Now that I finally did, I could see why this was revered in that way. The game is really fun and engaging all the way through, and I suppose the remake adds a little more content. And so the way I gauge a game as good or not good is if I find that when I'm playing a video game, I have to look up a walkthrough, not to actually walk me through the game, but to see how much of the game is left, that ain't good. That means that I'm getting bored with the game and I want to quit. This was one of those games which did not do that. And I would come back from work and play it and such. So the town of Silent Hill was complex and a confusing mess. And to this day, probably no one really understands how exactly it works. And the horror was done well too. Horror in general doesn't really scare me all that much, so I wasn't screaming at my screen or anything even during jump scares. I guess I got desensitized after playing Outlast 2. So I wish the plot was a little easier to follow near the end. I felt like I would have been way more emotionally invested in James' story if that was the case. It took me a lot of researching and reading up stuff online to actually understand what was going on and to completely grasp James's pain in this story. So that was one minor point that I had. The fog and graphics were absolutely incredible. Again, this was another game that really pushed my graphics card. One of the best looking games this year for me. I modded in DLSS ray reconstruction and the game was all the better for it. But there is one thing here. There are bugs and stutters and a whole host of issues with Unreal Engine 5, which I'm not a fan of. Wish the devs would take more care to resolve them or move away from UE5. Coming in at number 11, this pains me because I really wanted this to be in the top 10, and it was until I realized that I'd forgotten a game and I needed to include that in the top 10. So it pains me to put this here, but number 11 is Black Myth Wukong. So this was a visually stunning game. The water caustics in particular being rendered in real time absolutely blew my mind. Because I remember back when Spider-Man came out on the PS4, there was this jar in the opening sequence, where the camera pans over his apartment and shows him being Spider-Man, and there's a sort of jar over his mask. So in that particular scene, I remember Digital Foundry saying that caustics were added in artistically and weren't computed in real time because they were costly effect. And I assumed that would take a really long time to show up. And 5 years later or 6 years later, my card is running it in real time, and that was absolutely mind-blowing. The overall PT in the game was also really good, but really, really costly, which meant that I ended up locking the game to 30 FPS with DLSS performance at 4K. I don't really like how frame generation looks in very fast-moving games if the base frame rate is below 30. In Alan Wake 2, because there wasn't much movement, it worked out okay. But over here, there's just too much movement and too many fast things moving around. That sort of makes it a bit more difficult to accurately insert a frame. And it leads to more artifacting and such. And DLSS 3 frame generation is a relatively new technology, so going to take a bit more time, I suppose, to mature. Graphics aside, the only reason that this game didn't rank any higher was it was a bit too long. Each area felt a little too drawn out, and when I played it, there was no map and such, so I didn't know where to go. I would often get turned around. The areas looked a little too similar. That is, the places within one given area. There were 6 areas in the game, and each of those areas were different from one another, though. Some fights as well. There's certain fights in the game were way too difficult, and in a tedious, sort of unfun way. Even though I played many Souls games, so it was annoying that there are many games these days are trying to make me almost prove myself, and that was something that I wasn't a fan of. Wukong made me do that. So I about the story, I didn't really follow it initially all that much, but I got super invested a bit later once I saw the production value, and once I started to get attached to the characters like Baji and such. So I guess spoilers here, but at the end where Shen Monkey tells you that there was no Wukong as he knew had died, and that we had become Wukong through our journey, and ultimately Baji developed a connection with this monkey and was protective of him in the same way that he was protective of Wukong. It's not that's the tale of Journey to the West, right? It's not the scriptures that make you a Buddha, it's the journey there that makes you a Buddha. Even now, as I'm narrating this, I literally I physically got goosebumps. So this is something that Kung Fu Panda also did near the end with its Dragon Scroll, and it was done really well here too. The combat was nice. The boss fight were really good for the most part, again, barring the ones which were a little too difficult. My favorite moment in the game was once you defeat Erlang Shen, you get to fight all of the heavenly beings, the 4 heaven celestial kings or whatever. That was just absolutely mind-blowing. I was screaming at my screen in excitement at that point. And the ending was really good too. But it was a really great game, and I was hoping that this would be the one that wins Game of the Year. I played Astrobot as well, and I personally wasn't the biggest fan of it because while it was fun and all, it didn't have anything particularly special for me personally. Alright, so in some sense, those can be considered honorable mentions if you're looking at this as some sort of a top 10 list. But onto the top 10. At number 10, we have Metro Awakening. I play this game pretty much right now, and so the videos for a lot of these games are scheduled on the channel, but there are so many videos scheduled that these would all be coming out only next year. Metro Awakening was a super fun game, and I really liked how you actually felt like you were in a metro and creeping through the dark. I also liked the weapons and how you were supposed to use them during combat. It really utilized the strengths of VR effectively. When I was playing, I would often pull out a clip and pull back the chamber to see if a bullet was in there. Pull back the slide, sorry. When spiders jumped me, I would brush it off physically, or I would squish them. And the aiming down the sight was also really accurate and really well done. The game sort of spoiled me, and when I tried to play Fallout VR after this, I just wasn't able to get into it. I tried the flat screen version as well, but I realized that playing the main story mostly just didn't click with me. It had been on my backlog for 9 years at this point, and I realized that was because I never really liked it all that much. So coming back from that tangent, Metro Awakening also truly showed me why switching to your sidearm is faster than reloading. This brute came up on me, and I unloaded an AK clip into him, and he didn't die. So in a jiffy, I had to pull out my pistol and shoot him down. And once he went down, I went behind cover and I reloaded the actual rifle. So I got better at aiming, shooting, reloading, everything. The only reason it doesn't rank higher is because while it had some really cool moments and the general gameplay loop was great, and it felt really cool that I could do some of the things in VR that I'd done only on flat screen, like reloading and such. And there was this sort of transfer of knowledge. It didn't have that X factor, which a lot of the games on the list beyond this have. It was still a really great game, and as I said, it felt really good to transfer the knowledge I had from flat screen gaming to this, and it made it very intuitive to play through. The story was a bit lacking for me personally. I was too invested in the gameplay itself, and there wasn't nearly as much depth to the plot as I would have liked. And again, the confusing nature of the plot, things being shrouded in mystery, took away a bit from the experience for me. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with such stories. I like a good suspenseful story as much as every other guy, but this just didn't do the greatest job here for me. At number 9, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. The Lost Crown was not a game I expected to like at all. From this point on, all the games that I'm listing definitely have that X factor that I'm talking about previously. I had played Hollow Knight, and I really did not like it all that much. It was a fine enough game, but after that and Astrobot, I realized that platformers in general were not for me, if I am being perfectly honest. However, it seems like Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown was an exception to this because of how incredible it was. I bought it on my PC and on my Switch, so I ended up playing it for hours, and like I was playing it on the way to work on the Switch. I would sync up the cloud save, come back home and play 240 hertz on the PC 4K. I'm not the kind of person who buys multiple games on or the same game on multiple platforms, except if I really, really like it. And this was one of those games. The platforming as well really made me want to get better. I typically don't like platforming, but the sheer fluidity and the control you have, the powers that you have, and the combat itself, oh my god, the combat was incredible. I really loved the game a hell of a lot more because of the combat. The way you could chain combos, juggle enemies in the air, and just all your abilities. It reminded me of Spider-Man and Devil May Cry. Honestly, did feel like there was some inspiration from Spider-Man. There were some similarities, and definitely Devil May Cry as well. The level design was also really good, and one of my favorite ones was the ship frozen in time. That was really novel and unique, I felt. So the plot was good too, and I quite liked it, but it was simple. It was relatively in the background and not the focus. I'm not sure if I would have enjoyed this to the same extent if I hadn't played Hollow Knight, because that allowed me to have a better understanding of Metroidvanias in general. But hey, I am super, super glad that I played this, and such a shame that Ubisoft shut this studio down. I really wanted to see more from them. So, coming in at number 8, we have Lies of P. Lies of P was one of the first games that I played this year, and boy was it good. I had played a lot of Elden Ring last year, and I definitely had Souls fatigue. Some of it showed when I was playing Black Myth Wukong as well, definitely. But in retrospect, I suppose that really long games, really long, tough games, are likely to cause Souls fatigue. Lies of P was a crisp 20 to 25 hours, and the ideal duration of a game for me personally in general. It was just a great game. The exploration, the loopbacks, the combat, the story, everything. I was actually invested in the story of the game, though I didn't understand it fully right away again. A bit of Googling and world exploration allowed me to piece things together way easier than in a FromSoft game. I am not someone who typically likes to go looking for a story. I like it way more when it is served to me, like in RDR2 or God of War or Spider-Man, Last of Us, Detroit Become Human, even Uncharted 4, Batman Arkham City. These are some of my all-time favorite stories in games. And, of course, Assassin's Creed, like 2 Brotherhood Revelations, the old ones. Black Flag as well. Coming back, here, Lies of P managed to strike a brilliant balance of between spoon-feeding the story and making me look for things by getting me invested in the world and in the story simultaneously. But the truth is, I was here mostly for the combat and the exploration. I'm again typically not big on exploring every nook and cranny to find one healing potion, but Lies of P made me want to see everything. And it, again, managed to strike a good balance of linearity and exploration. So there was definitely, it had a more linear structure than something like Elden Ring. And that was one of the reasons I liked it, that it wasn't quite as overwhelming. And one of the biggest things I liked was that the bosses were not stupid difficult, which was another thing I really didn't like in Elden Ring. I felt like FromSoft really keeps upping the difficulty of their Souls games to keep their players continuously challenged. It's not a design decision that I personally agree with. Here, I could just enjoy the game while the bosses were not too difficult. I mean, they required focus, concentration, and all of that. Don't get me wrong. I couldn't close my eyes and play it, but I didn't keep dying over and over. I got a lot of bosses in the first try because I was more skilled from playing all of the Souls games. That was a huge win for this game, and one of the reasons why it's here. This was also one of the first games where I ended up trying many different weapons, and I didn't really Google things like what is Lies of P best weapon for dex builds or whatever. I just picked the one I liked, and I figured out most of the mechanics for myself. Really enjoyed the process as well, and I am eagerly anticipating the DLC. So, coming in at number 7, we have Armored Core 6. There might be a bit of a recency bias here because I finished Armored Core 6 literally yesterday, but my god, was it a fun game. Absolutely loved my time with it, especially the Ice Worm mission where the rail cannon charges up with the audio cue, and then the Ice Worm sort of pops out, and there's this brief pause, and Rusty goes, "I won't miss." And the shot hits the thing, and it falls down. That is just absolutely insane. I was a tank build for the most part, so this allowed me to steamroll almost any mech that stood in my way by just running over them and bazookaing them. I also had a medium weight build and a lightweight build where for certain missions where the tank won't work so well. But I really liked the combat in this game, like how fluid it was, and all playstyles were viable, and everything just clicked. It didn't feel too hard, and in fact, being a tank, it allowed me to enact a power fantasy almost. So this was one of those very few games where I went with a full-on heavy build and fully committed to it. And again, I didn't Google anything here. So the missions were short and sweet. As someone who has a job, a day job, and gets to play video games only on the weekends and such, any game which respects my time, keeps things short and crisp, allows me to consume it in bite-sized portions, always gets a win. And Armored Core 6 definitely won because of that. I tried many different weapons, from laser cannons to grenade launchers to railguns, miniguns, Gatling guns. They all worked well for different situations. Just a really fun action game, and it won Best Action Game of 2023, I think, and 100% deserves it. I want to see more from this series from FromSoft as opposed to more RPG-style games. It wasn't eye-catchingly beautiful in the way that Alan Wake 2 is, but it ran like a charm. Ran at 4K 120 FPS, no problem. Okay, coming in at number 6, we have Half-Life Alyx. Half-Life Alyx is one of the main reasons a lot of the subsequent games end up taking a higher ranking. And what I mean by that is it set the standard for what VR should be. You can see the influence of Half-Life Alyx in a lot of the games going forward, even if they're modded. So the reason Half-Life Alyx is the lowest here is because it feels relatively vanilla compared to a lot of the games on this list. Because those games took what Half-Life Alyx did and they built off of that, and they just became better games. That being said, those games are standing on the shoulders of giants, and Half-Life Alyx is that giant and is absolutely nothing to snuff at. I hadn't played Half-Life 2 before this, so I took this as my chance to play that first, and it was a fine enough game, but it wasn't anything special by today's standards for me, because I didn't have those nostalgia-tinted goggles. I can see how the game would have been revolutionary at the time, and a lot of games would borrow and still continue to borrow from Half-Life 2, much like the games later on this list borrow from Half-Life Alyx. And it made me realize how games in general are meant to be played close to their launch, like within a few years-ish. If you leave, if there's a huge gap between the time a game is released and between when you play like a decade or more than a decade and a half, couple decades, then it does start to look a bit dated and run into problems in that way. So I don't think this would be as much of a problem from the PS4 era because we have hit diminishing returns already. But for games from 2004, 2005, I can definitely see that. But anyway, with Half-Life Alyx itself, I loved how you could interact with everything in the environment. I remember picking up marker and drawing a picture of Einstein and, with E equals mc squared and stuff on glass, and that was absolutely insane. And the combat was also really fun, with me physically taking cover and stuff, reloading, throwing grenades, all of that. And the novelty helped a lot here. And this was one area where Metro Awakening suffered. I can see Half-Life Alyx and Metro Awakening easily switching their rankings if I had played Metro Awakening first, or not, I don't know. But I'm not able to simulate that novelty factor that Half-Life Alyx had. So the way the gravity guns were implemented was also really good, and it looked great in VR with a stable locked FPS. It was crisp and such. The story was really good too. And I guess the ending where you picked up the crowbar from Vance as Gordon Freeman was really cool. Makes me want to see Half-Life 3, honestly, and I can see why people are clamoring for it. And the gunplay and the grenades, everything, the manual reloading, it was all a really engaging experience. So that is it for Half-Life Alyx, and that's it for not the list itself, for like the sort of bottom part of the list. On to the top 5. These are games that are really special to me, and they really have that X factor. A lot of these games would be my top games of all time. There is a synergistic effect across all systems in the game, and that makes the game greater than the sum of its parts here. So, and most of these games are in VR. So I got a MetaQuest 3 for my birthday in March, and I absolutely loved my time with it. The VR medium is incredibly immersive, and that will reflect in my choices for the best games of the year. So let's start with the top 5 games of the year, 2024. Okay, coming in at number 5, we have God of War Valhalla. Yes, I know this is a DLC, but this is my list. And God of War Valhalla is a game that I really would have paid full price for, and I mean the full $70. I don't care that it was short. This was just so well done, and I am a bit biased because I already like God of War. The roguelike mode itself was fun enough, but the story and the deconstruction of Kratos as a character was just chef's kiss. The new weapon was super fun too, the Blade of Olympus, in the Rage mode. And the combat is straight from Ragnarok, so that's very good, not much more to say there. But the reason this is up here is because of the characters and how their stories were told. Mimir's involvement with Sigrun and his stories, like when there was this line where Mimir kept putting himself down, and Kratos said, "If anyone else disparaged you as much as you disparage yourself, I would wish to strike them down with an axe." And that line, it just hit me so hard because of my imposter syndrome and how much I self-deprecate and truly believe that I'm not good enough. The whole plot revolving around Kratos, Freya asking Kratos to become the Norse god of war, and Kratos coming to terms with his past after a heartfelt conversation with his young self, that was so powerful and so moving. I don't know. I don't think many other full-fledged games would live up to the plot and the characters of this DLC. But the fact that it is a DLC and that it is so short means that I cannot in good conscience rank this higher, because there are some better games coming up. That said, it doesn't take away anything from this DLC itself though. Not in the slightest. This was one of the few DLCs that absolutely lived up to the legacy of the base game, and it came out of nowhere, you know? So really happy about this, really happy with this DLC. Coming back to this after a year and a half or so, it felt like returning home after a long time, or meeting your friends after many years. It's a warm and comforting experience, and I really enjoyed it. Coming in at number 4, we have Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds is, strictly speaking, a flat screen game, but there is a VR mod for it that works quite well called No My VR. This is a game that really makes my PC melt, and I was getting incredibly shite FPS in VR, probably because the CPU is being used to run a physics simulation in the background and for the entire galaxy, so it's actually calculating everything all the time. There are a lot of frustrations with Outer Wilds. A lot of times when you get stuck, you absolutely do not know what to do, and I had to ping my friend who has completed Outer Wilds a lot of times, asking him, hey, where the fuck am I supposed to go? And this is worse in VR. The tolerance for frustration and bugs or anything that detracts from your experience is much lower, because you will have to probably take off your headset, look at how to fix it and such, and boy, there was a lot of that in Outer Wilds. Ember Twin Caves, fuck you. seriously, that shit was rancid in VR because of how frustrating it was. And I didn't really like the DLC. I dropped that. Let me get it out of the way real quick. However, despite all of these frustrations, I absolutely loved my time with Outer Wilds. It was strangely touching in some sense. Discovering the quantum moon and talking to Solanum, seeing how she's alive and dead was a jaw-dropping moment in gaming for me. All of this hit way harder in VR because the headset felt like an actual space helmet, and the spaceship, the planets, the sheer scale of it, falling into a black hole, and the anglerfish in Dark Bramble which swallowed me, like that freaked me out, honestly. That was one of the only times a horror element actually scared me, and props to Outer Wilds for that. And this is a game where the frustration was built into the game. I would usually not forgive a game for this, but here I think that was necessary and a good part of the experience. So the line that stuck with me the most was one from Solanum, where she said, "The universe is, and we are." I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this, but there is no reason for any of this to be easier or harder. None of this was made for me. All of this just exists. We struggle to find out and understand the secrets of the universe and get frustrated. But that's not because the universe is trying to hide something. The I isn't a being that wants to spite us or test us. No, it just is, and we are. And that was somehow incredibly powerful to me and put things in perspective about how life in general and our place in the universe. The way civilization is explored is incredible as well. How the I ends up becoming a godlike figure to the Nomai, how the quest for knowledge knew no bounds, and how evolution happened the way that it did. Because when the Nomai landed on Timberhearth, there were just fish, right? And the way the time loop plays out as well is just incredible, and how you piece things together is nothing short of absolutely spectacular. And I'm running out of adjectives here. What I really liked about Outer Wilds was that the only difference, on top of everything that I mentioned, was that the only difference between you at the start of the game and you at the end of the game is knowledge. Everything is right there in front of you, and if you know where to look, and I mean it's right there in front of you all along if you knew where to look, right? You just had to go through the journey. Maybe it is about the journey and the discovery itself, because you don't get some superpowers or any extra tools. It's just you and your spaceship going around planets trying to figure out the secrets of the universe from start to finish. And at the end, when we observe the eye, we get one last moment with our friends, as our brain is likely hallucinating or making the best guess about what it can see. I suppose evolutionarily our five senses could not comprehend the nature of an object which is quite as complex as the eye of the universe, and how touching it causes the Big Bang and ushers in a new universe, a bang that will be seen by the next universe and will likely start the cycle again. I don't know why all of this works, but it just hits me so hard every time I think about it. I'm getting goosebumps now again. And at the end, it wasn't some massively advanced technological civilization that found the eye. Not even the Nomai, who were way more advanced. Hell, we don't even get there using our own tech. We use Nomai tech to get there. At the end of the day, it was just a normal Hearthian who ended up becoming the creator of the universe. In a lot of ways, God itself. And to experience that in VR, to experience the Big Bang as you realize that this universe is dying and the next one has to come in, was life-changing. There is something odd about, and oddly scary, and I can't explain it, it's oddly powerful, I could say, about when you reach the eye of the universe and you look down and you see your own world sort of blow up. Everything you knew is just gone, and it is on you to bring about the next stage in the universe or the next cycle. There is just, it's just powerful somehow. And again, VR really added to this. I have seen how the developers talk about their game. I've seen some videos about it, and their passion for the game truly shows in the game itself. Thank you to the passionate developers of Outer Wilds for giving us this incredible gem, because this is a one-of-a-kind and once-in-a-lifetime experience. I wouldn't even call it a video game. This is something that I would recommend people who don't even play video games play, because this was just, and this one's close to my heart, and this one is it's yeah. Coming in at number 3, we have Batman Arkham Shadow. It honestly pains me to put Batman Arkham Shadow at number 3. I'm so tempted to put it at number 1. Honestly, every game in the top 3 can actually be my number 1. They could have been my game of the year and I would have been happy with it, but there is definitely a clear ranking between them, and I'll get to the other 2 games. Those 2 just hit harder somehow. Arkham Shadow is the best Batman Arkham game for me, period. Everything about it is just absolutely incredible. And this is one of the first VR games where I found the story actually engaging. And for a standalone game on the Quest, it ran really well while looking that damn good. And this game really elevated the standard for what a VR experience should be. And this is one of the reasons why Metro Awakening got a relatively low ranking. It absolutely spoiled me, because unlike flat screen gaming, there is a cost to playing in VR. You get more exhausted, you have to be standing, there are some frustrations with the headset if you have to remove it and stuff like that. So the tolerance for VR in general is a bit lower. In Batman Arkham Shadow, especially when you have a lot of combat, you get physically exhausted and you pant and you puff as you beat people up. So the game really has to make that inconvenience worthwhile. Here in Arkham Shadow, it didn't feel like an inconvenience at all. It felt like it was not just worth it, but a part of the experience in a way that just felt good. The game truly allows you to be the Batman. Like, straight up, the Batman Arkham Knight used that tagline, but no, this allows you to be the Batman. And this is still a Batman in the making. So Bruce gets to see the origins of a lot of villains and such. And he himself is far from perfect here. He loses control, he can't always get the information that he wants, and he isn't quite there yet as Batman. So playing as Matches Malone to understand the criminal underworld better was a really good story beat. But I felt like those sections were slightly dragged out. Not because they were dragged out, but because I just wanted to go back to being the Batman. But some of the coolest moments in the game come up when you are Malone, such as the Tiger Guard boss fight. Oh my god, fighting Bolton and like vaulting over him, beating him up, turning him around, pulling that, what do you call it, that canister on his back, smashing it into his skull. That was just incredible. And I love how when you put your hands up, and I'm doing that instinctively right now, when you put your hands up and you sort of spread out your cape, you can see your shadow as you glide. I don't care if it's realistic or not, that there is always light behind me casting that shadow, but it really makes you feel like the goddamn Batman. And stealth just works beautifully. You see a vent, and you know, in the previous Arkham games, you've seen how Batman pulls off those vents. He pulls them off, he slides it if it's stealthy. If it's not stealthy, he just pulls it and throws it away. And you've seen that hundreds of times. So without the game telling you anything, if you played the previous games, you just know what to do. And that, again, it makes you really feel like the Batman. I'm getting so excited as I talk about this. So it allows you to brutally interrogate and threaten multiple people in the game and beat them down into submission. It's a power fantasy dialed up to 11. The gadgets also work super well outside of combat, and even within combat. And the story was incredible. But there was a video that I had to edit for this before I was uploading to YouTube. But as I was editing, I found myself gawking, eyes glued to the screen during key story moments. So much so that I forgot that I had an actual video to edit. And the Scarecrow section, that also worked wonderfully well. But my favorite part, my absolute favorite part, was the combat. I sucked at it initially, but I really could feel myself getting better as time went on. Who needs skill points? I could physically become more skillful as I reacted faster to my enemy strikes, hit them harder, land more critical hits, drop less combos, and as enemies got tougher, I also got better. There is this knife takedown in the game where after you counter someone, you physically have to get out of the way of their knife. You have to duck and stuff like that. And once you successfully do that, it allows you to grab their arm and smash their elbow or break their nose and crunch their bones. Seriously, I know I might sound like a violent psychopath, but the feeling of crunching their bones just is so good. The game does such a good job of making that feel so incredibly satisfying. In fact, it allows you really become one with the character. It's like how in Assassin's Creed, when you get into the Animus, there's this sort of bleeding effect that they say. I experienced the bleeding effect because there is a prompt in the middle of a combat encounter where you're supposed to grab a guy and pull him towards you, and an animation plays out where you end up kneeing him in the face. Like you drag him down into your knee and you drive your knee up. And there are no trackers on my leg or such. These are only controllers. But I become so one with the Batman character that I end up jumping and kneeing the air in real life, and it really feels like you're hitting someone. Because of the sound effects and everything, it just works. Oftentimes when I do things like this, it is at my own peril because I smash my fingers into walls, tables, mirrors, and the like. And this is the only game where I found that worthwhile. There, I said it and I stand by it. Getting hurt is worthwhile if you're fighting baddies in Arkham Shadow. But all jokes aside, this is one of my favorite games of the year, and in general, this would easily feature in my top 10 games of all time. At number 2, we have Baldur's Gate 3. Now, Baldur's Gate 3 had an incredibly difficult challenge ahead of it. It was a really long game, like 100 plus hours with turn-based combat. I do not like turn-based combat, and if I'm being very honest, I do not like it in BG3. I didn't till the very end. I hate long games, and this was a CRPG, a genre that I'd never been exposed to prior to this. I wouldn't have even played this, but the fact that there were so many rave reviews and it won so many awards made me think that, hey, maybe this deserves a shot. At the start, I was completely overwhelmed by the number of choices in the game and the things I had to do. I literally spent an hour on character creation because of that. Like, I started recording the video and I had to cancel it because I spent like 45 minutes in just character creation. And the game just started throwing terms at me, like advantages on 1d6 rolls, DC 17, perception checks, perks, classes, etc. So I decided to skip a lot of the side stuff and a lot of all of this in Act 1. Specifically, as far as important side quests go, I skipped the Githyanki Crash and just proceeded with playing the story. And I couldn't fully appreciate the options that were there on display. But as I got deeper and deeper into the story, I found myself slowly caring about these characters. Like, a lot. So when Gale asked me for magical items, it initially frustrated me. Then after he told me what the problem was, he became a permanent party member. Astarion was such an ass, but after I let him drink my blood, and he showed his trust in me and I in him, he was a permanent party member. Shadowheart as well. I didn't even realize what being a Sharan meant, so I didn't care. I mean, there was a Silonite or a Sharan, I didn't care, how does it matter? But that got her to trust me, slowly, and over time, when it was time to kill the Night Song, I was able to tell her not to kill the Night Song, and she listened to me. I went back and through saves coming and tried to tell her that it was her choice, and she still didn't kill the Night Song. The way that I was able to influence Shadowheart through my actions was very powerful. And I saved scum like crazy, but that was because that was the way I liked playing the game. And Karlach was another sweetie. I expected to really like Will and Halsin, because they seem to be the most moralistic at the start of the game, but somehow I ended up connecting way more with Gale, Karlach, Astarion, and Shadowheart. And Shadowheart was my romantic interest in the game. Shadowheart, best girl, period. I'm not debating anyone on that. When Astarion stabbed his father and sobbed after, I almost sobbed. I was screaming along with him as I felt the same catharsis followed by that emptiness, and every choice that I had made came back. There was no such thing that was good or bad. That there was only what I chose within the given framework or within in that particular situation. And it always came back in a way that made sense and wasn't contrived. The story was so well thought out, and even the side quests, they tied into the main story so well. It fleshes the main story out a bit more, and it isn't some entirely disjoint narrative. And the sheer amount of freedom that the game gives you is absolutely mind-blowing. So these are a few instances. There was a point in the game where I didn't have Astarion in my party, and I needed to lockpick a chest from a bank, and I couldn't. So I ended up putting the chest in my inventory, and I took it back to camp. I took it out of my inventory, and then Astarion lockpicked it there. Then later, one of my characters couldn't jump to a high platform. Some of them could, some of them couldn't. So I took the same chest out of my inventory, had them climb onto the chest, and then onto the platform. I cannot imagine another game that would give you that kind of freedom. It would just wall you off in all likelihood. And another incredible point at which was when the game asked me to solve the open-hand temple murders. This was one of my favorite moments in the game. The game just told me someone died and I had to figure out who caused it. This was one of the first times I started to interact with how deep the choices ran and how many there were. So it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't show you a quest marker. It doesn't show you a set path. There is nothing like that. There is nothing like a Ubisoft game over here. It just, because no one knows, right? You just have that. So you could go around, you could talk to some people, you could find a secret cellar, you could look for clues and such. There were so many options. I just ended up casting Speak with the Dead on the corpse, and I found out who killed him. That kind of freedom is absolute insanity, and that runs through every aspect of the game. And all choices are distinct, and I never felt at any point like the game was forcing me to play in a certain way. But I did feel that at the start, but that wasn't because of anything the game did. I had a closed mind, and I was conditioned to think that games had a set path, like Ubisoft, like I said. The plot was also not all that complex. I mean, it was relatively simple for me, and you could truly play the role you wanted to. If you didn't care about the plot itself, you didn't need to. You could just be a bloodthirsty maniac who wants to take over the world, or you could just care about, hey, getting the tadpoles out. You don't care how they got into you. Or if you don't want to care about your companions, you don't have to. That's not how I played it. I chose to play it, and I genuinely think that the companion quests are the best quests in the game. I did all of their quests and the side quests. Probably not completely. I think the Githyanki Crutch was one I missed. I missed Lazel's a bit. But I did almost everything else. Act 1 and 2 took me about 35 hours to complete in total, but Act 3 alone took close to 70 because that's when I really got into the game. There are some gaps in the choices here and there because of the number of branching narratives, but that's completely fine. But for a game of this scope and this scale, they're so rare and minor that I can completely forgive the game for this. So, me personally, I never found the plot, again, as I said, so confusing as to look up something online unless I was really interested and I wanted to understand something in more detail. To me, what I really cared about were my companions and their stories and their lives. There is a saying which goes like this: simpler stories lead to complex characters, and that was something that I felt BG3 really embodied. The characters built the plot, not the other way around. And in this world, no one is perfect. Everybody lies, cheats, deceives, fucks up, whatever it be, including your companions. And your enemies aren't all black and white either. Sometimes they might help you just because their interests align or because it's morally correct. I don't know. That can happen. In this world, it's not about who is good or who is bad. It's about who you trust. And in BG3, you trust your friends. And I mean, even the Emperor tries to manipulate you and such. Do you trust him or do you trust someone else? It's your choice. There is no clear answer here. And I believe it was Mortismal who said that last part about you trusting your friends as the sort of not about good or bad, but it's about who you trust in BG3, and that is so true, and that is what makes Baldur's Gate 3 so compelling. That there is no black and white here. Okay, Orin is kind of evil, but that aside, and maybe even Gortash and the Netherbrain, but that aside, everyone is so complex and morally ambiguous. Even the devil is a complex character, you know, you can't quite understand him. So it makes everything so much more interesting. And in the end, when it was all over, I felt satisfied with the ending that I'd gotten, and I felt happy with the choices that I had made. As Wither said, if your mind were to see all the possibilities, it would collapse. Do not fret over the roads you did not take, and be happy with the one that you did, because it is, after all, your own. This was one of the very few games where I took off from work to play, and I just literally grinded at it and finished it. So, if there was an award for the best narrative writing, plot, or character, this would win that for me. And this was supposed to be my game of the year, but it was taken away. It was snatched away from it by my game of the year, and probably my favorite game of all time. Coming to the best game that I have played in 2024, and quite possibly my favorite game of all time, is Skyrim VR modded. So, it probably comes as no surprise to Bethesda fans and Skyrim fans in general. I started playing this game on the Meta Quest 3 because I was enthralled by the idea of using motion controls, having experienced it on my Nintendo Switch. Though over there, the motion controls are really garbage. You just, swing your sword or something like that. Like, you swing the controller, he swings the sword in game. It's not a VR experience. The vanilla VR game doesn't really offer all that much more, but I preferred to play it in VR because it was still novel to VR in general. And a lot of people told me, Skyrim fans in general, they told me that once you get used to something like Half-Life Alyx, it would be difficult to go back to Skyrim VR, which is not really a VR game. It's a game that is just ported to VR. And they were right. You don't even have a body or hands to hold on to swords or bows. You just see the bow or the sword and swing it wherever you wanted. And the immersion was great, again, because you were actually present in the world, and it was my first VR game. But the fidelity was a bit off-putting. Throughout the playthrough, I kept telling myself that the game would be so much better if it could look better. And there are mods for this, but I wasn't ready to set it up. That was until I discovered what modding could do for the game. Quick context, I haven't played Skyrim before, so this is my first time experiencing the game. And I genuinely feel like I lucked out because this was the best way to experience the game. From Higgs to Plank and Spellwheel VR, the entire experience was just transformed. I've honestly forgotten how the base game functions. I don't mean how the base game looks. I literally cannot recollect how the base game worked. Having a body in VR changed so much. I don't remember how the menus used to work, how I used to switch out weapons, how I used to switch out spells. I cannot remember this. So now my sword swings felt so much more natural and so much more realistic. Magic felt like it was being cast from my own hands, especially with the haptics and such. It felt like I was burning things down or healing up, whatever. And when I was using a bow, I actually had to aim down the bow and carefully position the shot. And the angle of the bow and the arrow would change the trajectory of the shot. And I don't know if they actually emulated this in-game or they just let physics have its way, but it was absolutely incredible. And I sucked at archery at the start because there was no reticle. And as time went on, I got increasingly better at it, and I could see why in the regular game, stealth archers were the best builds. And I definitely got way better at archery, sort of like how I was talking about skill points in Batman Arkham Shadow. Here, there was something similar. I had to I no longer had to close one eye to take a shot. I could hit my targets from further away. I started compensating for the drop of the arrow, and using mods like Higgs and Planck meant that I could pick things up off of the ground or the table or whatever. And Skyrim VR functions a bit more normally compared to Fallout VR, which is why Fallout VR was way too broken and Skyrim VR was much easier to work with and mod and all of that. So my immersion skyrocketed when I could pick things up, throw them at people, grab people and such. And when I was in battle, I found myself grunting, screaming, the dragon shouts that come along with the character. So when he's like Fusroda, I'd be like Fusroda. So that was something that I actually started to end up doing in real life. I was coming up with my own custom finishers, including spinning attacks, dual wielding in battle, screaming the dragon shouts. Sorry, I already said that. And I would, when I was using heavy weapons, I would hit slower and more deliberately, even though the game never really demanded that. And it felt natural, as I said, with a heavier sword to move more slowly. Motion sickness was a thing when I started, but as time went on, it completely vanished, and I got my VR legs, I don't really recollect a time when I was motion sick anymore. The build I used was also super fun. It wasn't the most optimal by any means, but I could do whatever I wanted. I could use a sword and a shield, dual wield swords, use heavy axes, shoot bows and arrows, shoot arrows from afar, and also cast insane spells. I completed the College of Winterhold questline, and that made me the Archmage of Winterhold. So I had a lot of cool weapons and spells as a result, while still having the option to fight hand-to-hand or use archery. The sheer number of options made it so much more fun. And one of the greatest additions, mods-wise, was Spellwheel VR. So Spellwheel VR added gesture-based conjuration, which meant that you could take things to a whole nother level in terms of realism. You put your hands together and you make a sword physical, like you draw out a sword, and that works. And for summoning characters, you make a circle with your hands, similar to how Doctor Strange does with the sling ring. And when you are in battle and you're trying to summon it like that, using that use my moving around in a circle, and it doesn't immediately come out, the pressure on you is insane. I would be like, come on, work, and it would work, and then I would select it, and I would have an assist, from the entity that I conjured. When a dragon is breathing fire down your neck, and you're trying to do that, that is insanity, insane. And one more thing which I really remember about Skyrim VR is that at one point I injured my shoulder, like my right shoulder, and my right arm was not able to function freely. So I wasn't able to strike things down and such. I wasn't able to use my right arm to attack with a sword anymore. So I had to wield my sword with my left hand, and that meant that I was clumsy and the game felt harder as a result. It may seem like a trivial thing, but it immerses you so much more. You have an injury, then you have to use your other hand and you're not as good at it. If I played the game for like 9 to 10 hours continuously, it felt like my stamina meter was draining in real life. My sword swing slowed down, I moved less, and it felt harder until I slept and woke up in real life. Now, it's not all perfect. There were some dungeons in the Winterhold questline, that were a little too long, and there could have been certain elements of the game which were a bit frustrating, but this was one of the first times, again, because this was one of the first VR games in general, so there is a novelty factor here. I do agree, I do concede that, but this was the first time I felt myself being so immersed in the world of a game. I wanted to learn about the politics of the region and participate and such. I'm not even interested in politics in real life. Overall, this game is a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10, even. That was until I discovered Mantella. Mantella is a mod with an extremely complex installation process. It took me like 6 hours or so just to set that up. But it integrates an LLM, I think GPT-4, into the game. You can also run it locally, but I integrated GPT-4. And once you do this, you can talk to NPCs in real time. There's a text-to-speech model, so the LLM can, as I said, be a synthesizer, can be run locally, or it can be a ChatGPT or something like that. And there's a text-to-speech synthesizer with about 220 gigabytes of voice models. The installation really reminded me of a lot of setup documents at work, and they look like a cakewalk at this point, like setting up this entire infrastructure and environment. But once I had installed the mod, the game transformed. Every character came to life. Every NPC was no longer an NPC. They had their own stories, their own routines. I talked to a chicken which said that it had heard of KFC, and because its friends went there and they never returned. Every time I wanted to find a store, I could just ask someone in town. Now, they weren't always right, but they were right enough to prevent a couple of Google searches. This is something that really excites me about the future of gaming in general. The potential that something like this has is incredible. Nothing even comes close to the feeling of just being able to walk to someone and walk up to someone and talk to them. You can even aggro them if you say something to piss them off. With the Jarl of Whiterun, I debated politics and asked him if his heart isn't heavy with all the innocent lives that he claimed. I asked the dragon Parthenax if I can truly trust him and if I can trust Odawig. Hell, I even talked about my personal life, the stories of my college, the crushes I've had on with Parthenax. It made me, of course, I understand that these are just words of an LLM and a synthesizer, but even so, in that moment, the illusion was convincing enough to make me feel like Parthenax was a real character, and I ended up developing a sense of attachment to him, much more so than a regular character in a video game, because Parthenax, this version of Skyrim, was my friend. Not the player's friend, not the Dragonborn's friend, but my friend. Parthenax knows what is up with my life, and that increased the level of immersion to such an astounding degree, and he would even remember it because of how Mantella works. He would remember what I told him before. So this puts the game above almost every game I have ever played. Hell, this doesn't even talk about the sheer scale of Parthenax in VR. You feel tiny compared to him, and a flat screen is never going to do that justice. I have to keep looking up at Parthenax and feel tiny next to him. Like, my entire arm is smaller than his face, you know? And it doesn't have all the high emotional beats like God of War Ragnarok, but it is a damn good game with all the mods. Standing at the throat of the world, talking to Parthenax about my life, staring at the northern lights as day breaks, is an experience I would not forget, ever. And for that reason, this is a 10 out of 10. The base game, 8.5 or 9. The modded version, maybe even 11 or 12 out of 10. I don't know, I can't. It's just an unforgettably beautiful experience that everyone must have. Nothing, and I mean nothing, has come close to how amazing Skyrim VR has been. I do not know how I'm going to return to flat screen gaming after this. That's how I felt after I finished Skyrim VR. I genuinely did not know how I would be able to play flat screen games. Hell, I genuinely ended up removing some of the games from my backlog as a consequence, because Skyrim VR truly spoiled me. And I can't see why Bethesda has many fans and diehard fans. A shame that they don't make games like this anymore. An unmissable classic that has to be experienced by everyone. Definitely. Phew. Okay, that was just supposed to be a top 10 list, but I suppose that ended up being an entire retrospective on my year in gaming. Granted, I played a few more games. I played Marvel Rivals, Ultimate Alliance, GTA Vice City, Breath of the Wild, Dishonored 1 and 2, played Alan Wake, first game, and a few others here and there. But they didn't hit the highs of the games that I'd mentioned. Not quite. I have completed over half my backlog at this point, but I ended up adding about 50 or so more games while doing this. So I've taken about 58 steps forward and 45 steps back. But over the year, I've realized that my backlog exists because I've never really played some of these uninteresting games. And those games are the games that actually stress me out. The ones which I'm actually excited to play never really bother me at all. I actually want to play them. So maybe I will take a relaxed approach to my backlog in 2025. 2024 has been a funny year. It feels like it took a while, but it also feels like it ended really fast. And a lot of things changed. I will be switching jobs soon. I have ended up losing touch with quite a few friends along the way as well, some because things even went sour. And throughout those times, the few things that helped me to keep going were the gym, the games, and the people in my life who stuck with me through all the ups and downs. I don't really think a lot of viewers are going to make it this far into the video, and for the ones who do are most likely going to be my friends and family. So if you are watching this, thank you for watching and supporting me in whatever way you have throughout this year. Happy New Year 2025, and here's hoping for a great year with lots of great games, PRs at the gym, action figures, and friends. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next year.